For what should be obvious reasons, later in the story, I'm withholding my friend's name. I'll just call him Matt or Matthew for the sake of privacy purposes, or whatever the whole thing is. It's been over 10 years since it happened. When I was really little, I met my best friend in the world, Matthew. His father and mine were friends from college, and we just kind of bonded when we met in no time flat. Matthew and I were born just 10 months apart, so we had fun confusing people on who was older when they didn't pay any attention. Back when I was 5, my grandparents both died in a car accident during a snowstorm. But Matthew's grandparents sort of took over the job for them, so I started to refer to them as my grandparents as well. We used to visit their farm out in Idaho. Their farm had some thick woods behind them, a bit cliched, I know, especially since that's where the majority of the story will take place. When I was 10, we were invited over to stay for the entire summer. Naturally, we agreed and convinced my parents to let me go. My Uncle Sam always went with us to ensure safety. We went on a long flight from Michigan to Idaho and greeted our grandparents with a large hug, waving goodbye to my jet-lagged uncle. They were thrilled to see us, as always. My grandmother, let's call her Alice, reminded us of the rules of never going back into the woods. And our grandfather, let's call him Nicholas, always reminded us of the poison ivy and the dangerous wild animals like snakes and raccoons. There were also plenty of bear traps to be used on wolves and bears and such that try to get to the farm animals. They had also taken us back at one point and shown us an old barn from when they were kids. This farm was passed down through the family for a long time, they claimed. The barn was so old that it looked like it could fall apart if somebody even touched it. Naturally, they were wary of us going inside, so to keep them at ease, we didn't go near the place. When they weren't awake at night, we used to sneak out and take old cruddy flashlights with us, and then go back to the barn and explore around it. We'd gone inside a few times, but the boards were really rotten, so we would get nervous. We were about halfway through our summer with our grandparents one late night after a horror movie marathon. Matthew sat up in his bed and he turned to me. I was reading an old comic book and the look on his face caught my eye. From the other side of the attic where we were allowed to sleep, I saw him wave his hand for me to crawl over. I did slowly, clicking off the flashlight, but he grabbed it back and he clicked it on, much to my surprise. "Let's go all the way inside tonight." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" I asked, looking over his little smirk with some concern. That smirk always meant bad news. "The barn. Let's go all the way in and upstairs," he replied with a chipper tone in his voice. The barn used to be a hideout and playhouse for our grandparents. I looked at Matthew like he was crazy. "You know how rotten it is. What if we get hurt or can't get out or something?" He laughed a little, forcing my cheeks to puff out and turn red. "What's the matter, you a chicken?" he teased, starting to bewalk at me. Truthfully, I was a bit of a coward. I didn't like the idea of getting into serious danger, even just a little. I can probably thank my overprotective parents for this, but being a kid who didn't want to look weak to his best friend, I yanked the flashlight from his hand, grabbed on my little cowboy boots and my coat. Even though it was usually pretty hot in the day, the night was somehow cool enough to make us shiver. "Let's go," I said as bravely as I could, feeling oddly scared of this idea. Matthew sat there in shock at my weak bravery and then grinned like always, hopping up and joining me. We made our way quietly down the stairs as we could, grabbing a few snacks for the trip, and then we slowly creaked open the back door and made our way out into the night. The forest was a long ways away from the house, and we knew we had to hurry in case some of the animals tipped off our escape. We made our way quickly into the woods, hopping over logs and cracks in the ground, the sounds of the leaves crunching beneath us being the only sounds besides some crickets, an owl or two, and our breathing. I ran behind Matthew, so I was surprised by a sudden stop. I bumped right into him. I hadn't really been looking ahead, but rather down at my feet so I wouldn't trip. "Matt, what the hell?" He clamped his hand over my mouth with wide eyes, and then pointed ahead of us, whispering, "I saw something big moving." My eyes went wide in fear. It could have been a bear for all we knew, but after a horror movie marathon, I was thinking of everything but bears being out there. Matthew and I stood there as I listened closely for leaves crunching, and then I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I shrieked in fear, leaping up pretty darn high for my age and height. I felt my heart pounding at my chest, and then I heard the sound of Matthew's high-pitched laugh behind me. "I can't believe you actually fell for it, Zach. I can't believe I got that to work." His laughter continued as I frowned and I clenched a fist. Shut up. I wasn't scared." I lied, hoping he'd buy it. It wasn't a surprise when he laughed harder. I had screamed like a little girl after all. "I'm sorry, Zach. I had to." He always did. He sighed after the laughter, nearly stopped and wrapped an arm around my shoulders playfully. "Come on, little scaredy prince. I'll protect you from any scary monsters in the dark." He laughed again. I felt more cowardly than ever in that moment, and I was thinking on getting him back, but I couldn't think of anything at the moment. We continued on our way, just walking for a bit to catch our breath from our run. And then Matthew stopped again, and I bumped into him once more. I was a bit startled because I had been shining the flashlight on the ground so we both could see if something was there. I opened my mouth to ask why he'd stopped again, but he clamped his hand over my mouth once more. He held a finger to his lips, genuine fear in his eyes this time. He pointed behind himself and I looked past him. A light shone brightly from behind the thick leaves of the forest foliage. The barn. Our hearts were racing as we got down on our hands and knees, making as little sound as possible as we inched away to peek through the leaves. There was a fire brightly lit outside in a campfire. Some sort of small animal had been skinned and put on a stick, roasting above the crackling flames. We waited a while to see if someone would show up, but nothing happened. I was scared out of my 10-year-old mind. Wanted to just go back home and tell her grandparents in the morning. But Matthew, he just had to be the brave one. He stood and stepped down through the leaves before I could think, and I found myself following him, my hand nervously gripping on the back of his coat. I half expected him to tease me again for it, but I could feel him shaking slightly. He led me over to the old door to the barn and he pushed it open. It creaked open a bit loudly, much to our dismay, and a foul stench filled the air, like that of rotting meat or old fish. We gagged quietly and then made our way further inside. I really just wanted to turn and run, but I know I couldn't leave Matthew behind, so I didn't. As he said, we went further inside and made our way into the old, rotting stairs. I shone my flashlight around nervously to see the inside. It looked the same as always, but something was deeply off. I forced the thought out of my mind for the time being, making my way up the stairs with Matthew, my heart pounding to the point that it hurt. Once up the stairs, the scent was so much stronger. We nearly threw up on the spot, I think. We heard the sound of flies coming from a small room down to the left of the long hallways. Matthew took the lead again, leading me along into a room at the very end of the said hallway. The scent was so strong, and the buzzing of the flies were so loud. He reached to open the door, but I gripped his arm gently, shaking my head and mouthing, "No." But he just pushed my arm away, gripping the knob tightly to avoid me trying to stop him. My breath stopped as I waited for him to turn it, terrified and curious at the same time. He turned the knob, but it stopped halfway thanks to the lock. I let out a sigh of relief, but he was silent. He then turned to me in the dark, and I could only see his face thanks to the faint light of our flashlights. "We need to tell my grandparents about this. Something is seriously wrong here, Zach." And then we heard it. Footsteps. They were heavily creaking along the floorboards downstairs. Matthew bit his tongue as he silenced himself, his eyes wide as he took a look back down the hallway. We clicked off our flashlights under our coats to muffle the noise and got back down on our hands and knees, creeping to the staircase. We peeked out, myself being balanced atop Matthew since he was stronger of the two of us. A shadowy figure was visible in the faint moonlight peering through the old, broken windows. The large being let out a small grunt as if he was looking for something and he couldn't find it. The fire outside was burning less brightly, but it did assist the moonlight. Matthew and I held our breath as he thunked around downstairs, rifling through old boxes and cases of stuff. We backed away slowly to avoid being seen and we looked at each other. Matthew was thinking what I was. We had to get out. This guy could have been a crazed murderer on the run or something. We both looked around, not moving any body parts but our heads and hands, desperately looking for a window or something to just jump out of. The barn wasn't that far off the ground when it came to the second floor, so we'd probably be fine. But we didn't see anything. So we stood as slowly and quietly as we could, wobbling slightly. We were both thinking the same thing. If we couldn't run, we could hide. We tiptoed along the hallway slowly. A door was open slightly at the other end of the hallway. It was our best shot. We made it past the stairs without him seeing since he was somewhere else down there and we were getting close to the door. But my foot went right through the floorboard. I let out a squeak of fear, thinking I had been grabbed or something. Matthew's heart probably dropped when I did so. But I was sure both of our hearts sank to the bottom of the ocean when we heard a confused grunt, followed by fast-moving footsteps. Matthew motioned for me to get up as quickly as I could, but my leg had gone completely down. I was stuck. He quickly figured this out and grabbed my arms, tugging me out just as the man had reached the top of the stairs. We backed away slowly into the darkness, praying that he wouldn't see us. But luck wasn't on our side that night. He stared long and hard into the darkness where we stood. I could see that he was nearly 7 feet tall. If he was a bad guy, we were so dead. And when I saw his body coming over to us fast, I screamed. My best friend grabbed my arm and tugged me along, ducking under the man's legs. We ditched our flashlights, some of our snacks fell to the floor as we made our escape. He glanced around and then let out a growl, racing after us. We straight up jumped down those stairs and then barreled out of the old door, breaking wood on it. The fire was dim by now and we could not see a thing as we ran, just going for the faint lights of the city peering through the leaves. We could hear him chasing us. We were scared as hell, no doubt. Due to my cowardly nature, I think. When I heard his footsteps getting closer to me, I sped ahead of Matthew. That was the biggest mistake of my entire life. Matthew stumbled and broke off the path we were making, right into one of Grandpa's bear traps. It didn't seem real as I heard him scream in agony, and the sound of the trap clamping down on his leg. It still doesn't seem real. The man was closing in fast. I raced back to him, but I could just barely see the man. I could have sworn that I saw his eyes flash in the darkness under his hoodie. Matthew saw the fear in my eyes and shouted for me to run and get help. I couldn't move for a few seconds. I was frozen with fear. But he screamed at me again to keep running and to get our grandparents. I couldn't stop myself now. I sprinted away as fast as I could, leaving my best friend in a bear trap with the man. I heard one final noise as I was running. Matthew was screaming, begging to be left alone, begging me to come back. His fear had gotten to him by now. But I didn't stop. I wished that I had gone back. But even though I wished I could have helped, it wouldn't have done anything. I didn't stop running until I was home. I ran through the back door, then slammed it shut and locked it, screaming for my grandparents. They came rushing down to the stairs to find me, crying my eyes out. I frantically explained what had happened and saw the fear in their faces. As Alice called the police for help, Nicholas told me to go to bed and not come out until the morning. Later that night, unable to sleep and shaking like nuts in my grandmother's arms, I saw dozens of headlights. Over half the town had showed up to help, and the entire police force was on it. They all went out to the woods to search for Matthew and the man. I ended up passing out in fear, and was told that I woke up 2 days after the incident. My parents and Matthew's parents were there. I'd been transported to a hospital to make sure that I was alright. My first question was, where was my best friend? And for what seemed like forever, nobody would answer me. They just sat around me as I forced myself to sit up to see their faces. Their expressions nearly gave me their answer, but I wanted to believe that it wasn't true. I wanted them to tell me that it was just a dream. I wanted Matthew to just pop up from under my bed and laugh at me for worrying. But nobody said it. Matthew didn't pop up. Instead, my mother gently began to explain. The police and the townspeople searched all over the forest all night, but all they found was the barn, the fire, and the bloody bear trap end. She shuddered before continuing, obviously struggling. They found 3 dead bodies upstairs in the barn behind a locked door. The police think that the man may have been a crazed murderer. They haven't found him. I stopped her. I don't care about that freako. Where's Matthew? Did they find him? I shouted, a begging look in my eyes. She froze and winced, and then bit her lip and looked away. All they found was his coat, Zack. Matthew's gone. My dad chimed in and I just sat there, my entire world crushed. My best friend that I'd known all my life was gone forever. He was most likely dead if that guy was a murderer. Tears fell from my eyes and my parents tightly held me close. I could hear Matthew's mother crying behind me, which forced harder tears. Weeks later, I was out of the hospital after having told nearly countless reporters what had happened. But my parents and Matthews insisted it never be released. I will admit, I was confused. Why let me tell them, then tell them to not release it? I still don't know. I underwent some therapy for a while, but I refused to show any signs of distress to keep my parents from worrying. But one night, I sat reading a new comic book my parents had gotten me in my bed. The flashlight causing little strange shadows to dance across the walls due to the time. When I felt uneasy, I felt eyes on me. I looked up, sweating slightly. Nothing there, just my room. I went back to reading, but the feeling stayed with me. And that's when I heard it. How could you leave me, Zack? I gasped. My eyes darted all around the room, flashlight bouncing along with them. Nothing there, but the voice didn't stop. I begged you to help me. How the heck could you have left me out there? The voice was clear as if he was there, right in the room. I felt my heart skip a few beats, my eyes wide and breathing erratic. Matthew. I thought I was your friend, Zack, your best buddy, but you left me behind to die, bleeding and crying. What kind of friend does that, Zack? I thought I was going crazy. I gripped my head with both hands, covering my ears to block out his voice. My flashlight fell to the floor with a gentle thunk, and the voice just grew louder. Zack, I won't forgive you. You're the worst friend ever. You let me die, Zack. You let me die. You just ran away and let me die. The screaming was unbearable. I shouted in agony. Leave me alone, leave me alone. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to. I kept screaming, tears flowing down my face, not even stopping when my parents burst in, concern written all over their faces. The next day, I returned to therapy. I was really scared to tell them what had happened, in fear that they'd lock me away in a mental hospital like they did in the movies. His voice was still in my head as I spoke to the kind and calm therapist, telling me to shut up. You have to pay. You will pay. The phrase was repeated over and over, and in the end, I thought it helped me. The voice faded away slowly. I felt free. I didn't hear the voice anymore. I made new friends and I went to new schools, and I lived a normal life. I even got a girlfriend. My sweetheart from kindergarten, Nora Winston. It's been so many years since that night, and I still remember the look on Matthew's face when he was in that bear trap. So much fear. He was just a kid like me. It wasn't fair, I always thought. I always wished that I could go back and change that, but I knew deep down that I probably wouldn't have made it out alive. But a while ago, after I graduated, I heard him again. Did you miss me, old friend? I've been watching you, letting you have your little happy life and all. And he hasn't been quiet for long since. As I type this, he's screaming at me to stop, but I refuse to listen. Call this a work of fiction if you want, but I know this voice isn't fake or just in my head. Matthew is here. He's back. And I'm going to be stuck with him until I die, I'm sure. He's in my head and he won't go.